And welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined as always by my co-hosts, Ben Anderson and Matt Majinski. We were recording about 20 minutes earlier today than usual. Our usual time will be 9 o'clock, but just for the timing of our schedules, just had to do 20 minutes earlier. So our apologies for that. Guys, another week of college basketball in the books. We have Feast Week coming up. So college basketball pretty much all day throughout the week. That's going to be pretty awesome. Pretty good week for me to have a break from school. How are we doing today?
We're doing good. And obviously Feast Week, probably one of my favorite weeks in all of college basketball. You obviously have March Madness, which is like up here on the scale. Opening week is always fun, but Feast Week kind of makes everyone feel like we're finally back in the groove of things in college basketball. Teams are playing good teams. It's just a great week for this sport.
Absolutely. And the tournaments this year, I don't know if you've noticed this, but they're fantastic. I remember Dan and we did a pod episode back in the off season on which tournaments were the best MTEs that were there. And just all of these tournaments are so stacked. So I can't wait to see some high level basketball being played around the Thanksgiving holiday.
Yeah. And we've already had a few that we could say that about, which we will discuss. We will like I've been saying, we recap this past week in these episodes. So let's get into our winners and losers. Matt, we'll start with you. What is your winner of this past week?
Yeah, obviously a week in college basketball where I think we're finally getting to know a little bit more about teams. And I think one thing we are learning is that mid-major basketball is going to be big. That was my winner of the week. And it kind of revolves around the fact that Feast Week is coming up, but mid-major teams got a little bit of their own taste of Feast Week this week. Obviously, with Vermont and Liberty playing today in a huge high-stakes mid-major clash, and a lot of these mid-major teams were able to play in some of these tournaments this year, and I think we saw them on the highest level. Obviously, a team like James Madison makes a splash a week ago against Michigan State, but it's cool to see like a tournament like that with St. Louis, Vermont, College of Charleston, all these mid-major high-end programs kind of get the spotlight a little bit, because the real Feast Week, which starts this week, is all about the power conference teams. You want to see the teams in the Maui, the battle for Atlantis. So why not highlight some of these other programs that have had great years after years, been consistent, and they had a little bit of their own show this week.
All right, Ben, what's your winner of the week?
I think mine has to be the guards of Kentucky basketball. You know, they've gotten this idea or this knock on them that they don't perform super well in college, but by the time they get to the league, that's where they really shine. Now, I think that this Wildcat team has the chance to be one of the best in Calipari's recent past, and it's because of the guard play. They have 4 very solid pieces, and 5 if you include Antonio Reeves, if you want to count that. But in particular, I wanted to shout out Rob Dillingham and Reed Shepherd. Reed Shepherd was the 5th highest rated recruit coming into this class for Kentucky. He's a true freshman, son of Jess Shepherd, who also played for the Wildcats. And he had one of the more impressive box scores I've ever seen in the win over Stonehill yesterday, or a couple of days ago at least. He had 25 points and 7 assists, but on 9 for 10 shooting and 7 from 8 for 3. That's hard to do in a gym alone, right? That's a super impressive box score. And Rob Dillingham also played well in this time here. He had 20 points there, 7 assists as well. And they're doing it on the defensive end as well. On the defensive end too, Reed Shepherd with, I believe, 20 steals and blocks in his first 5 games as well. Just overall, I mean, if you're looking for a successful team, guards win in March. That's what we always say. And Kentucky, I think, has them this year.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that Kentucky-Kansas game on that next segment real quick. A game that Kentucky was controlling for a while and ended up losing. We'll discuss that. But getting into my winner, I mean, kind of on this theme, I'm going to give my flowers to fast-paced basketball enthusiasts. I've been noticing that some of these teams are really just pushing the pace this year, flying up and down the court. Like I said, that Kentucky-Kansas game really stood out to me in that respect. So I kind of did some research on this. I wanted to see if this was just me and my perception or there was some actual truth to this. And it turns out we were on pace for the fastest paced average Division I basketball game in at least 5 years at 70 possessions per team per game. Last year's average was 67.1 possessions per team per game. There's a number of factors. Of course, it's been all like non-conference play, and there's been a lot of lopsided games that might skew the numbers a little bit, but I think we are even more in store for just a super fun feast week, and these first 2 weeks of college basketball have most certainly set the stage for that with a fast-paced play. Getting into our losers, though, Matt, what's your loser for the week?
My loser is a coach that is very near and dear to my heart, the former coach of the Seton Hall Pirates, now with the Maryland Terrapins, and that's Kevin Willard. Obviously, a lot of this was last week in the Asheville Championship, or I guess more toward the beginning of the week. I'm trying to remember when that wrapped up, but I think it was the end of last week. I think Clemson won that at the end of last week. But regardless, Maryland kind of started out bad to the season, and it just seems to be getting worse. I want to highlight one game in particular: 40 points against Villanova. Not just any Villanova team, a Villanova team that Kevin Willard should be prepared to go against. I know it's not the Jay Wright Villanova team of the Big East, but it's a program that he consistently coached well against at Seton Hall. Sure, there were times where Villanova would blow them out. That's what Villanova's all about. But Seton Hall was one of those teams that always kind of had a little bit of a thorn in the side of the Wildcats. You didn't see that with Maryland. You haven't seen fight from Maryland all season long. And 4 games in, it already seems like, okay, I don't want to be like Kevin Willard's on the hot seat because they need to give him time to grow. Like, you got to give a coach 3-4 years. But it seems like this year is already kind of going down the drain. And that's not good because that's a program that really puts their basketball first. To be 1-3 with the losses, and a loss to Villanova isn't bad, but the way they lost it, that's the concerning part, because it just makes me think that maybe this team isn't that talented, and they won't stand for that in College Park.
No, and I'll talk a little bit more about Maryland later, but Ben, what's your loser for the week?
Yeah, my loser is I'm going down to the mid-major ranks and picking St. Mary's. The Gales, when we covered this, Dan and I, in our 100 to 1 countdown, we said, okay, is St. Mary's that good, or is Gonzaga just not that great this year, right? Why is this the reason that St. Mary's is picked to win the West Coast Conference for the first time in a long time? And I think we sort of saw that maybe they're just not that great this year. 2 straight losses. The first one was a shocker to Weber State. Matt was talking about that on the pod live last week. And then they come in and they get demolished by San Diego State. One thing to note here is that St. Mary's wasn't a great shooting team, but they were a pretty good shooting team last year. They shot 36% from beyond the arc, and Alex Dukas and Aiden Mahaney each shot just around 40%. That number's down to just 25% this year, with no one shooting better than 36% from beyond the arc. Now, of course, this is a small sample size, but if they aren't getting that type of production from outside, it does worry me slightly, especially if they're getting, now all of a sudden Mitchell Saxon, who's arguably their best player, is getting double teamed in the post, things like that. I don't know about the St. Mary's team. I trust Randy Bennett to turn it around, but it's not looking great so far.
No, it most certainly isn't. I definitely noted that as well. For my loser, I'm going to do another just like generic thing here, but bad free throw shooting was just a pet peeve of mine my entire life as a college basketball fan, but especially just this past week, I've noticed it's really cost teams some games. I remember on Friday night, I was watching the UMass Harvard game. My beloved Minutemen outplayed the Crimson, but went 10 of 25 from the line and lost in overtime. It brings me to just my biggest frustration in college basketball. It puzzles me because I know like you're tired and you're under pressure. It's not like me just going into the gym and making 7 out of 10 free throws. It's not like that. But these are things that the average person could do. And the amount of talent that these guys have, the insane plays that they make, and then they just miss free throws consistently, just bugs me. There are 32 Division I teams currently shooting under 60% as a team right now, including Oregon, St. Mary's. That's been a problem with them, Illinois. And I had that prediction with UMass Lowell beating Georgia Tech in my upset picks last week. Well, Georgia Tech went 13 of 23 from the line in that loss, a major reason why they couldn't pull that one out. So free throw shooting, had to get that out of the way. When you can't do it, it's so frustrating to watch, especially in an otherwise well-played basketball game. All right. let's get to the game picks that we made last week, and we'll talk about some of these results. So looks like I made up a little bit of ground here. 7-7 on the year, not fantastic, but definitely better performance than last week, and 5-2 overall for the week. That's pretty good for me. What do we want to talk about first here? I'm thinking Kansas, Kentucky is probably the first way to go. We already mentioned it, so we'll keep it a little brief here. But yeah, Kentucky was up 14 at the beginning of the second half at some point, like before the under 16 timeout. They were just out athleting the Jayhawks. That's the way I saw it. They were just more athletic, and it was simply a matter of Kansas just outlasting them over that 40-minute span. I know Coach Cal is not a good late game coach. We've seen that, but that last possession by Kentucky was just pathetic. I mean, what do you guys think of this?
Yeah, 100%. To me, we did learn a lot about the Kentucky freshmen because they'd been playing well up until this game, but it was against mid-major teams, so we weren't really sure what to think of it. But I think now we can certainly say that I think this Kentucky team will be coming along. Now, the freshman that started the game shot terrible from the field. Pretty much anyone in a Kentucky uniform that started the game shot terrible from the field. Antonio Reeves was, I think, 3 for 17 from three-point range, which is like, wow, that is bad. But Rob Dillingham continues to impress. Reed Shepherd continues to impress. Again, it was a struggle for Justin Edwards. It was a struggle for DJ Wagner, but I think they will turn it around. And I think that the number one thing is at least half of the freshmen, the key freshmen, played really well. Now you just need the other half to come around, and it's one game, so it's not the end of the world. I'm sure there were jitters. I mean, that is a big, high-level event. We'll leave my comments for the Champions Classic itself for another episode because I'm not a huge fan of it overall, but Kentucky proved that they are legit, and, of course, Kansas proved that they're legit. I mean, that's kind of what you want in the Champions Classic. These teams are ranked high. They both showed why.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've said everything that needs to be said about the Kansas-Kentucky game. Two other games I do want to point out here. Marquette defeated Illinois on the road in Champaign. I thought that was a really impressive win for the Golden Eagles. One thing I noticed from Illinois is that their lack of a true point guard really stifled them a little bit offensively late in the game. I really like every other position that they have. I think Terrence Shannon's going to have a great year, even though he didn't have a fantastic game that night. But Marquette's a good team. I think that they're a little bit under-regarded in the Maui Invitational, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the episode. But that was definitely a great win for them to go on the road and beat a strong Illinois team. And then lastly, Michigan had a bit of a roller coaster week, right? Looked fantastic against St. John's, right? Just blew the doors off of the Johnnies there, but then turned around and lost to Long Beach State, right? What do we make of the Wolverines? It's going to be really interesting to look at how they fare throughout the rest of non-conference play and try and find out who's the real Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, also Duke, Michigan State, that was a big game earlier on in the week. Duke looks good. That offense is not completely crisp yet, but I think the defense will definitely carry them until they could get there offensively. And you got Filipowski, of course. That's a very good safety net. I think they need the guards to step up, the Blue Devils, that is. Specifically, Tyrese Proctor is going to have a big year for them to really reach that ceiling, and going 4 of 12 from the field. Not ideal in that game, but shout out Caleb Foster, freshman guard, 18 points off the bench. Michigan State probably, I don't know if they will be, but probably should be unranked. They did follow up that loss with a 20-point win over Butler, but I don't know. Well, we'll talk about them in the game picks. They will be playing Arizona, but not a good start for them either. And then what about you guys want to just touch on the other couple games this week?
Yeah, 100%. You know, obviously Connecticut with the win over Indiana by like 20 points. I mean, a game where it's kind of at home. It's in Connecticut's backyard at Madison Square Garden. Indiana, kind of a team that I was not very high on at all this season, and they're showing why. I mean, there's just not much to that team. They lose Trace Jackson Davis. They lose actually a lot of players. It wasn't just TJD. He's going to be the guy that people focus on that they lost, but it was more than just him. And it's going to be tough for any coach. You know, Michael Woodson's a great coach, but that's going to take some time, whether it's this year, whether maybe they just are going to be a team that isn't as good this year, and they're going to build for the future. And then Creighton, Iowa. I want to say a little bit about that. I mean, Iowa, a team that was able to score 84 points. I want to see what this Creighton defense is going to be like, or if that just shows that Iowa just continues to have good offenses under Fran McCaffrey. And Creighton putting up 92. We knew that Creighton was going to have a team that could score the ball. They showed it against Iowa. Little nervous about the Hawkeyes and what they might be able to do, because I think that also says a little bit about their lack of a defense, but certainly impressed by the Blue Jays with that win.
Yeah, and then the last one, San Diego State, St. Mary's, 79-54. I mean, a great win for the Aztecs. Jaden Ledee really took over. Reese Waters has taken a step up this year. That's a USC transfer. St. Mary's definitely has some things to figure out. I mean, we talked about that just too many times where their offense just disappears. And when your offense disappears against San Diego State, unfortunately, San Diego State is just too dynamic offensively, just could just score in any given night consistently because they could attack you in so many different ways. So that when you score 54, you're not going to come anywhere close to San Diego State. That's really my point. You guys ready to go around the conferences? All right. So we're going to start with you, Ben. As this always goes, we just, one person takes on a conference. We go through the 6 power conferences. So we'll take turns and each of us will take 2. Ben, we're going to start with the SEC, and the floor is open to you, wherever you want to go with this conversation. Just what do you think about the SEC from this past week?
Yeah, absolutely. Some breaking news for you guys as we're recording. Mizzou just lost at home to Jackson State. Not a great start for Dennis Gates and the Tigers. They already have a loss to Memphis and had to really grind one out against Minnesota on the road. Interested to see how that continues going down the line. I'm really interested to see what these high-level teams in the SEC look like against their big opponents that are coming up through this next couple of weeks. Texas A&M is going on the road against Virginia. That's going to happen on Monday from tomorrow, so I'm really excited to see what that looks like. Tennessee, obviously at Maui. We'll talk about them throughout this podcast as well. And then Alabama has a couple of games coming up too on the docket. Really, just these are a little bit untested, so I'm interested to see what they look like. Alabama has Ohio State, which I think is going to be an okay team. The bottom of the Big 12 or the SEC, excuse me. Not great. Arkansas was a very divisive team when we were looking at them in the preseason. They just took a double-digit loss to UNC Greensboro at home. Ole Miss had to grind one out against Detroit Mercy. That's not great either. I'm interested to see how it shakes out in conference play, because behind like the top 4, I think, of Alabama, Texas A&M, Kentucky, and Tennessee, you could put them in a lot of different orders, right? And I'm intrigued to see this conference play out and how many bids they're actually going to get.
All right, Matt, we'll give you the Big East as usual. So same thing as Ben, just wherever you want to take the conversation, go ahead.
Yeah, Big East, obviously, week 2. I should make that note, not week 1. Sorry for that minor thing on the graphic there. But alas, the Big East, obviously, I think the big thing with them is the teams that we thought that would be good have been playing well. Villanova obviously had a little bit of a hiccup against Penn, but with the exception of Villanova, you see a Creighton team that still hasn't lost. They're beating everyone by a lot of points, and they took down Iowa to get a quality win. We see the same thing with UConn, literally beating everyone by a lot of points. I just mentioned a little bit ago, not high on Indiana, but it's still a Power 6 team that the Huskies take by 20. We see the same thing with Marquette. Now, Marquette's going to be in the Maui Invitational this week. We're going to learn a lot about what this Golden Eagles team is truly all about, but so far, they've been winning games by a lot of points. On the flip side, the bottom of the Big East is really, really bad. DePaul is the worst team in Power Conference basketball. Worse than Louisville. That was proven today because Louisville gave Texas a run for their money. DePaul, not a good team. 1-4. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know if a coaching change is going to solve it. I don't know what can solve it, but DePaul is a mess, and I could go on and on about that. They're terrible. Even the rest of the bottom of the Big East, and I guess I shouldn't say the bottom, but, Georgetown's been kind of off a little bit. St. John's hasn't really been there. They haven't lived up to the hype there. there's a lot of storylines in the Big East coming into each year, and I think St. John's was the biggest one. So if they can't bring it back up, then this conference truly is going to be as top-heavy as ever. Maybe Providence is that team. I don't want to talk about Seton Hall too much because Pirates just really haven't played an actual team yet this season. So we'll see. We're going to learn a lot more. I know a lot of these teams have tough schedules in Feast Week, tough tournaments to play. So right now, top-heavy. Who's going to join them? Who's going to make a run and be like, hey, we deserve to be on that list too?
Well, speaking of top heavy, this was actually especially the case last year, but we're going to talk about myself, the Pac-12, who the Pac-12 is not supposed to be a good league. They're not off to as poor a start as one would have expected. Arizona, especially, they followed up their big win over Duke with then 2 blowout bye-game victories. They put up 97 and 100 in those 2 games, respectively. So good on them. Undefeated teams are Colorado, Oregon, and UCLA. None have been tested too much, but UCLA will play Marquette tomorrow in the Maui Invitational opener. So that will be a game that we'll be keeping a close eye on. Shout out to Washington because they followed up a tough loss to Nevada, then got a nice win over Xavier. So I don't really know what to make of this this conference. I mean, I think we could say pretty fairly that Arizona's pretty clearly the best team right now. If we're looking at the epitome of brutality watch, there was 3 of them this past week, most notably USC, who I might have honestly slated at the top. I think I actually had them second in my Pac-12 preview, but either way, losing to UC Irvine, even without Boogie Ellis and Kobe Johnson, that's not a loss that you want to take. If you were curious, the other losses were Cal falling to Montana State and then Stanford being upset by Santa Clara. But yeah, the number 2 slot, the number 3 slot, like it's all up for grabs. It looks like right now it's just Arizona. Then I don't know, maybe Colorado. But like I said, they haven't been tested yet, so we don't know yet. All right, and then Ben, we're gonna circle back to you. Big 12 takeaways from week 2.
Yes. So this is the best conference in college basketball, in my opinion, at this point. The Big 12 is just very stacked, but in a different way than I think we expected it to be. One shout out I want to give is to Houston. They haven't played much of anyone yet. Utah is their best win, but their defense has been stifling, right? There is not a team I think I would want to play less at this point in the season than the Cougars and Kelvin Sampson. I think they just are a miserable team to play against all the time. And I would not be surprised in the least if they gave Kansas a run for their money at the top of the Big 12. In addition, Baylor continues its hot start at 4-0. I think they're a little bit better than Dan and I gave them credit for, as we were talking about them in the preseason rankings. But on the bottom end, there's a couple of concerning teams, I would say. West Virginia lost to Monmouth, not great, obviously. But Oklahoma State, man, 1-3 start. They got swept down in Charleston when they were there to St. Bonaventure and Notre Dame. Notre Dame, probably the worst team in the ACC, excuse me. And then Texas. Dan, I think it was Matt alluded to this in the Big East preview, but they won a tight game against Louisville. Mm-hmm. They needed a Max Asmus game-winning shot with 0.4 of a second left, and even that was not a great offensive possession. Caden Shedrick had a good game, but that's a little bit concerning if you are the Longhorns, because I don't think Louisville's that good. I just think Texas played down to competition. So the top of the Big 12, great, fantastic. Middle and bottom, it's TBD on who's going to fill those, 7 to 13 slots or so forth.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I'd say that we didn't expect to have a bottom really bigger than 1, maybe 2 teams, and that might be the case in the Big 12. But like Matt said, maybe it's just because the bottom of the power conferences are so low. Maybe that's because mid-major basketball is rising. So, Matt, you got the ACC now. What are your takeaways from week 2 in that conference?
I do, and the ACC, another conference close to my heart, obviously, and a conference that I think came into this season very under the radar and underrated. And I think when you look at the ACC right now, it's safe to say that there are 4 teams that could legitimately win the NCAA tournament. Duke obviously was a team that we looked at right from the beginning of the season, ranked in the top 5. Some people had them at number 1, 2, 3, you name it. And with the win over Michigan State, again, didn't look dominant, but a good win, kind of showing that, yeah, this is a quality Duke team that just lost to Arizona, but bounced back. And we know that they can be a team that plays well in March. And I know I'm looking real far ahead here, but I'm just talking about, these are teams we need to pay attention to. North Carolina, another team. Let's wait and see how they do in the Maui Invitational this week, because they're going to have they're not in the Maui Invitational, but they're in. Someone's going to have to tell me here. Someone's going to have to step in. I lost my mind apparently, but we'll get to it. UNC's in a tough Feast Week tournament. But Miami, really the team I want to talk about, going out, beating Kansas State today, winning their Feast Week tournament. Miami is they're back. I mean, they were an Elite 8 team, Final Four team last year, and they're still there. I mean, yeah, they lost a couple of key players from last year's team, but they've still got Nigel Pack. They've got Norchad Omier. I mean, they are loaded. And the fourth team, Virginia, already with one quality win. I know you guys will be happy that I'm making this assessment, but I believe that Virginia is right there at the top tier. And we've got Clemson. We've got Syracuse playing well. That comeback over Colgate, I want to note, that was one of the best comebacks. I was there. I was there as a part of media for our page, and that was just awesome to witness. A lot of the teams in the ACC are playing well. Now, Wake Forest, Georgia Tech, a couple of the teams haven't been playing too decent. I am a little bit disappointed in Wake Forest. They were a team that I thought would be better than how they are playing. But overall, the ACC is proving the doubters wrong. People like to hate on the ACC. Well, you can't really do too much hating right now.
Yeah, by the way, North Carolina is in the battle for Atlantis.
Yes.
Battle for Atlantis. They've got Arkansas, Memphis, Michigan, Northern Iowa, Stanford, Texas Tech, Villanova, I believe.
Yep.
So that's a pretty decent field right there. So to cap off this segment, I'm going to talk about the Big Ten, which, starting with Michigan, as I think Ben mentioned, this was just a roller coaster of a week for the Wolverines. First, starting with the win over St. John's, pretty significant win, and then losing to Long Beach State. Shout out to 5-0 Nebraska. They're scoring the ball. Bryce Williams has been a nice little addition. The Charlotte transfer. Wisconsin looks a little shakier defensively than I think we're used to seeing from them, even after that loss to Tennessee, where I believe they gave up 80. They then had a double-digit loss to Providence. Right now, the Badgers' effective field goal percentage against is 55.3. That is 305th in the nation. So the shot making against them, they've been getting up too many good looks. Of course, regression to the mean is expected, but not a good start for them. And then, Matt, you said this in the losers segment, but Maryland, I just want to reiterate it. They look really, really bad now. 1-3, losing to Villanova, only scoring 40 points. Their season high on points this year was 68 points, and that was in their opener against Mount St. Mary's. So, just overall looking at this conference, I mean, we still have the teams at the top, like the Purdue's of the world, are going to hold their end of the bargain. Michigan State, we talked about them a lot last week, but they of course, the loss to JMU and then the loss in the big game this week. But more to see on them. This, as of now, the same narrative holds with the Big Ten. Like, a little bit overrated. Like, what are they going to do come March time? But I think that's what I've said is a pretty fair assessment of the conference. So that will do it for Around the Conferences. Let's get into our mid-majors. We love them at CBB Review. We got to give some love to them every single episode. Today, there's a couple conferences that we wanted to talk about. So we're going to start with the America East and then get into the Ivy Leagues. Both of those mid-major conferences had a lot of storylines throughout the weeks among their teams. Let's start with America East. So first off, just on a little bit of a more negative note, we'll talk about Bryant and their head coach, Jared Grasso. I don't know, Ben, if you want to elaborate on this, because I know you've kind of been following the situation, but he resigned this week after a leave of absence. No details, as far as I know, were provided other than that it was unrelated to health, and we know he was charged with a misdemeanor earlier this year. It is worth noting that Phil Martelli has taken over as an associate head coach, and what does he do? Well, he takes down number 10 Florida Atlantic this week, so that's worth noting. But Ben, talk to me about that whole Bryant situation.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate situation for the players, the school. I hope Grasso is doing well. He was on a leave of absence, like you mentioned before. Not a ton of details coming out from the school's end or from Grasso's end. But as you said, Martelli Jr. is up and the interim coach, and they did come out with a win against a number 10 Florida Atlantic team. Like, this is a huge victory for these players, and they got some dudes on this team. Earl Timberlake, Doug Eddard, if you remember him from St. Peter's lore. He's not doing too much on this team, but that's something to note. Rafael Pinzon as well. He came in from St. John's. So this is a legitimate team in the America East, in my opinion. And the top of this league is pretty strong comparatively. You know, you think of this as Vermont's league to lose every single year, but you got Bryan as a challenger, and you also have UMass Lowell as a challenger. Dan mentioned this. He nailed the upset pick last week, right, of Georgia Tech over UMass Lowell. That was a huge, UMass Lowell over Georgia Tech. And then they went across the country and almost beat Arizona State as well. I mean, this is a strong team, best team in the state of Massachusetts, ? Right? Who knows? But we'll find out, I think, sooner rather than later. But yeah, in the America East, not a great start to the week. Definitely some wins and losses here, but on the court, I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better one.
Yeah, I mean, it's just hard to pick against Vermont in this league, right? So Vermont, for context, is 4-1. They just lost to Liberty in that Myrtle Beach finals just a couple hours ago, and they lost last year's top 3 scorers, but they've won the regular season every year for the last 7 years. So I'm evaluating the America East every year. I'm like, I try to like convince myself there's some team that's going to challenge Vermont and beat them. And, you know, in the conference tournament setting, it happens from time to time. But it's, as much as I like UMass Lowell, as pesky as they are, Ayinde Hakeem is a star. They look good. I'm still picking Vermont in that conference. I don't know, Matt, if you have anything to add, or do you want to move on to Ivy League?
Yeah, I can take us to the Ivy League because I think you guys hit a lot of the stuff on the America East. I think I will say real quick, like with the Jared Grasso situation, that video, I don't know if you guys watched it, that did come out with him and the cop confronting him at his house, definitely was very odd and interesting. And we'll see how that plays out. Again, hopefully that he is doing all right and can learn and grow and can just get himself back into a good situation. But yeah, Bryant's got some talented players. America East is certainly a very underrated, a very deep conference, unlike past years. But again, we look at the Ivy League. I mean, we mentioned Penn with that win over Villanova. I talked about that a little bit ago. Yale with a strong start. I mean, let's talk about a Colgate team that almost went in and destroyed Syracuse, and Yale goes and beats them by 18 points. I know Syracuse ultimately came back and won that game, but it just shows how good Colgate is and how good Yale is being able to put away a team like that. We've got an undefeated Princeton team that's 4-0. We all know what Princeton did to start the season. It was a little while ago, but beating Rutgers. And, you know, you look at the Ivy League overall, I feel like a lot of times people look at the Ivy League at the end of the season in March. People like to look at what this league is made of once we get to March Madness. The old adage that, if a 15 or a 14 or a 13 seed out of the Ivy League, we're going to pick them to upset a team in the first round. But I think that this year you need to look at the Ivy League more than ever, because it's not just going to be that type of league. It's going to be, there are multiple teams that could make a play in March, and they're going to battle, and they've already kind of proven it so far this season.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about also even Harvard with, like I said, that huge win over UMass this weekend, and then they come into Conti the next day and they played BC tough. Like, they were winning at halftime, I believe. Yale in our preseason 100 through 1 CBB rank, I think Ben and I said this might be the best Ivy League team in years. But little did we know there's like 4 or 5 very quality teams in that league. So just worth noting, those are two leagues that don't get a lot of attention in November per se, but this November in 2023, I'm paying attention to these leagues for the reasons we discussed. All right, guys, let's get into the game picks for next week. These a lot of really fun games that we have. I will personally be at one of them, the Empire Classic at MSG. That'll be one of our game picks, but I can't wait. This is feast week. Let's get into some of the games. So game number 1, what do we got here? Yep, this is the game I'll be at. So UConn and Texas. This one taking place at 7 o'clock. If you are watching at home, it'll be on ESPNU. We'll start with you, Ben.
I don't know how you can look at the games we saw today and pick anyone but UConn in this scenario. They look dominant against an Indiana team that, Matt mentioned he was a little low on them, but they still got talent. I mean, that's a definite high major team, I think, and UConn just smoked them. Meanwhile, Texas struggled with Louisville, was trailing for a lot of that second half, and relied on a Max Abmas game winner to beat the Longhorns here. To beat the Cardinals here. Caden Shedrick was the key player in that game, dropped over 20 points, but I think Klingon will neutralize him. I got the Huskies in this one.
Yeah, no reason to pick Texas, honestly. Again, struggling with Louisville, I do think it shows that Louisville maybe is coming along a little bit. Maybe they're not as bad as people say, but certainly speaks more about Texas, a team that probably should have won that game by at least 10 points. UConn without Stephen Castle certainly doesn't seem to matter as he had that knee injury. Huskies still got a lot of players. Tristan Newton, one of the top guards in the Big East. He just continues to improve his game at Connecticut, and pretty much a home game for UConn. So even if Texas were to try and win this game and play really well, they're going to have the crowd against them.
Guys, I'm picking Texas. Here's the thing. Like, I know that the recent performances indicate that UConn is the easy pick here, but just a reminder of the sport that we're following here. This is college basketball, and really in the regular season, it's 31 different versions of your team that we see. And from one given night to another given night, it can completely change. I know Texas had an embarrassing performance today, almost losing to Louisville. I think, though, they survived. They take that momentum of that Max Abmas buzzer beater. You said that Caden Shedrick will be neutralized by the UConn bigs. I see it as, well, now Texas actually has somebody that can match up with the UConn bigs. So I see it as like kind of the same statement, just taking a little bit of a different slant on it. And as long as Shedrick stays out of foul trouble, which has been a problem with him his whole career, I think Texas really has a shot in this. And really, I think their guard play is what's going to carry them over the top. So I've got Texas in this one. I'm going to try not to go chalky here. Next game we've got in Maui, Gonzaga and Purdue. What a game this is setting up to be. I'll take this one first. I'm taking Purdue. I think Gonzaga can be exploitable with the inside-out game that Purdue loves to play. Just play through Zach Edey. He's a really good passer as a big. They will also not be able to run their normal offense, Gonzaga that is, with Edey in the post, just swatting shots everywhere. So I'm taking the Boilermakers in this one.
Yeah, I think for the Zags to win this game, they're going to have to get the ball inside to Drew Timme. Oh, wait, Drew Timme is no longer on Gonzaga. For that reason, Purdue is going to win this game because Zach Edey is going to dominate with no Drew Timme in this Bulldogs team. I don't know who on Gonzaga is going to be able to match up with Zach Edey the way he's started out this season, and everyone else around him are falling into line. I think we're going to see Purdue start to really rewrite the ship after last year's first-round exit to Fairleigh Dickinson. We're going to see Purdue come back with a vengeance and win this first game in the Maui. I don't think it's going to be particularly close, guys. I could see this. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I wouldn't be surprised if Purdue has an 8, 10, 12-point lead around the 4-minute mark, and Gonzaga has to try to foul to get back in or press to get back in. I don't think we're going to see a 1 or 2 possession game down the stretch.
Yeah, I'm with you here. I think you got to pick the Boilermakers in this area. One thing about Gonzaga that's interesting is that their guards are not necessarily the strength of their team. They have Hickman and they have Ryan Nembhard, but really I'd be a little bit more worried about Gonzaga's front court if I was their opponent. And that's not necessarily the type of team that Purdue struggles with. They struggle with quicker guards, right? You saw that in the Fairleigh Dickinson upset. So I just don't think this is the type of team that can beat the Boilermakers. I'm not saying they're, invincible, but I don't think the loss will come here.
All right, game number 3, we got Virginia and Wisconsin, a game I know a lot of people are very much looking forward to. Hey, we got an over-under of 125, so a little bit of a slightly different version of these two teams, as we've seen a lot of like games in the 50s, 40s in the past between these two teams. Matt, you go first here.
I've gone back and forth on this game, this tournament over literally since the summer. It was an article I wrote on in the summer, and I think I've changed it up since then. And with college basketball, you just continue to change your pick. And in this moment right now, I think Wisconsin comes out on top. I think Virginia's the better team, but I feel like Greg Gard's back is against the wall. The way that Wisconsin has started this season, there's pressure on him to make sure that they don't lose another game, because Wisconsin has already dropped 2 games. They haven't really looked good in either of those losses. So I think that for this talented Wisconsin team, at least I think it's talented. They have some pretty good players off a team that won 20-plus games last year. They had one of the best returning lineups coming back this year in the country. So I would kind of expect them to, I don't want to say hold a players meeting, but kind of look each other in each other's eyes and be like, hey, we need to win this game. I think it comes down to that, because it is a very even matchup, and I just think Wisconsin needs it more. Not to say that they're the better team, but just they need this win.
You know what? I think I'm going to go with the Who's here. Like you said, Wisconsin's lost 2 games and they haven't looked great in either of them. Why would I pick them? You know what I mean? That's just sort of how I see this game coming out. I really liked what I saw, albeit against bad competition in Texas Southern, but Virginia put on a Bennett-like performance. This is like vintage. We're talking 2017, 2018, Virginia holding the Tigers to 33 points, in the entire game, right? I think that this is the most versatile Virginia team we've seen, arguably since the national championship, but definitely since 2021. And this Wisconsin team hasn't wowed me. And I don't know if they have a go-to guy that would be able to defeat Virginia in the way that they need to be defeated. I don't think Chucky Hepburn or Steven Crowell or AJ Storer has that potential. And even if they do, they're just going to throw Ryan Dunn on them, and that's going to be a night for them, right? I got the Who's.
I've got the Who's as well. I picked against them last time, but even without McNeely, right? Isaac McNeely, the lights out 3-point shooter. We're not sure about the status of him. He was out for that Texas Southern game. So with McNeely in the lineup, they showed a lot of their offensive upside. Without McNeely in that Texas Southern game, they showed just what a dominant defensive team they could be, like Ben just talked about. So the fact that they really have both in them, it could be a heavy defensive battle. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it turns into that, especially if McNeely doesn't play. That being said, I trust Bennett to win a game like that. And then we've got, going back to Maui, Marquette against UCLA. I've been really impressed with the Golden Eagles so far. I'm going to continue to bet the team with a lot of continuity, roster being very similar one year to the next. I'm taking Marquette. I like to just early on in the year, I think this is a team to keep picking in these games. So once again, I'm going Marquette.
Yeah, I'm going Marquette as well. I think that actually should be the favorite to win all of Maui. I just think they're that team that is the most connected, the most well polished heading into the invitation. I don't know if they're the best team, but I like this team in a strong field. UCLA did get a wing from Turkey eligible this past couple days, so there's some NBA hype around him. I cannot pronounce his name, but that's something to consider as well. I think it'll be a little bit closer than people expect, especially since it's the last game of the night. I think people are just looking forward to a Marquette snoozer so they can get to bed early. But I think UCLA will give them a game. Just Marquette's guard power is too much.
Yeah, I don't think it's smart to pick against the Golden Eagles in this one. The Bruins, I feel like we've brought this up a little bit, but Adem Bona is their best returning player from last season. They really haven't played a marquee game this year yet, so this is going to be their first real test. And not only are they playing one of the top-ranked teams in the country, they're playing one of the top-ranked teams who also have some of the best chemistry in the country in Marquette. I mean, the way Tyler Kolek is able to lead this team and move this team around, it is an art. He has mastered running just this Marquette offense, and they have so many other players who can take over and interchangeable, you name it. Marquette is going to win this game, but I do agree. I don't know if this is going to be like a big blowout. Like, I'm more confident in Purdue's ability to put away Gonzaga than I am in Marquette's to put away UCLA because of that same reason. Like, I'm kind of just expecting to see a UCLA team coached by Mick Cronin to not go away without a fight.
Fair enough. So two games that we all three of us agree on. Two of them that two of us agree on. The other have another team. Let's get to Florida and Pitt. We'll start with Matt on this one.
An interesting game. Florida has started off really good. So is Pitt. Carlton Carrington, I want to shout him out, a freshman on Pitt. He's put up points. He's rebounded the ball. He's distributing the ball. Looks like he could be the surprise freshman of the year in the ACC. But Florida is also playing very well. They got a big transfer class in. Todd Golden is trying to build something at Florida. And I'm basing this pick off of the fact that Florida beat a Florida State team by 22 points. A Florida State team that wasn't that good last year, but I trust Leonard Hamilton's ability to turn that around and not make the same mistakes as last year. So it was surprising, honestly, given that the Gators, they have a good player in Riley Kugel. They have Tyrese Samuel. They have a lot of players on this team that I don't know if Pitt is ready for yet, but certainly this game could go either way. Like Blake Hinson could go off for Pitt. Carrington could go off. There's guys on Florida that could. I think this is a game where there's a lot of players to watch, and it's an even game, but Florida's win over the Seminoles leads me to believe that the Gators will take this one.
Yeah, I'm with Matt here. I like the Gators as well. One piece to note is that Zion Pullen, a transfer from UC Riverside, did not play the first 3 games, but played against Florida State, had 15 points and 4 assists. So he's getting back into the swing of things. I think that was sort of a missing piece that this Florida team needed to reach its full potential. And because of that, I like them over a Pitt team that hasn't really played anyone. I think Pitt will be good. I think they'll challenge for a top 6 spot in the ACC. But at this point, the Gators are the pick here in my mind.
I'm going to disagree with you too. I'm going Pitt. I think a week or two ago, I would have probably picked Florida in this game, but I really, really, really liked what I've seen out of Carrington. Just, I was so worried about who's going to step up in the Pitt backcourt, right? And they've got one. I'm really excited to see the front court of Pitt match up with Micah Hanlockton, who dominated the first ACC team they played in Virginia. Virginia still pulled out that game, but I think Pitt will be able to defend him in the interior a little bit more. And I'm going with the Panthers in a close, just entertaining, fun game. Then we've got Arizona and Michigan State. This one on Thursday. I'm going to stick with Arizona, right? There's no reason to fade them. Kind of the logic that you guys use to pick in UConn in that UConn-Texas game. I'm going to use that logic to pick Arizona in the Arizona-Michigan State game, right? Arizona, the Wildcats, with a big win over Duke. They've been scoring at ease pretty much everywhere. I would not be shocked to see Michigan State win, but the fact that Umar Ballo hasn't even really gotten going yet, like, the upside of this Arizona team is so high, especially in this regular season. Wildcats for me.
Yeah, it's just Arizona. I mean, like, Michigan State, I still think is better than what we've seen them do so far in this season, right? JMU's a pretty good team. Duke's obviously a good team. They haven't shot the ball well. I think the ball will go in the hoop eventually. That being said, Arizona, even at Michigan State's peak, I still think Arizona is going to be better than them this year. And because of that, and they're still getting in the swing of things, I got to go with the Wildcats here.
Yeah, I think that if Michigan State hadn't started off the way that they did, like after today's win, and I know it was against Alcorn State, so it doesn't mean much, but they did look pretty good in that game. Like they're turning it around because of the Butler win as well, but it's just they started off so bad to the season that I don't know if they're ready yet to win this game, if that makes sense. Like, I think if they had another game or two, or maybe I'm not ready yet to make this pick. That's probably a better way to put it. If they had another win or two and I'm like, okay, Michigan State's turning it around, okay, but I'm not like ready to believe that they've turned it around yet because it's only been 2 games. So for that reason, I'm picking Arizona, a team that, by the way, has looked like they are one of the best offensive teams in the country so far. Tommy Lloyd is a genius. Like, that guy has this team playing well year in and year out. What a hire by them when they did that.
And then our mid-major game of the week, we got UNC Wilmington at Florida Gulf Coast. Ben, what do you think here?
Yeah, absolutely. This may not look like the biggest game in the mid-major ranks so far, given that Florida Gulf Coast is just 1-4. But not all 1-4s are created equal. And because of this, I'm going to take Florida Gulf Coast in this scenario. It's at home. I think that they've gotten unlucky in a couple of their games so far. They just lost to Hampton yesterday, but the Hampton shot over 50% from three. That's really not going to happen all that often. They got some talent here. Pat Chambers is a good coach. I think that altogether, they have the chops to finally pull one through and get that upset that they've been looking for since they just lost close to Indiana and they lost semi-close to Pitt, lost close to Missouri State, right? I think this is where they're finally getting through.
Matt, what say you?
Gotcha, man. I wasn't sure if you were going to go. I've got UNCW in this one. Look, I want to point out that a 3-0 start over two non-D1 teams. So, take that with a grain of salt. But a win over North Carolina, Asheville. We've talked about how good Drew Pember is, and they beat them on the road by 17 points. So I think that alone shows me that UNC Wilmington is a good team. We'll see, though. We'll see if they're too tired because they have Murray State and Appalachian State also this week before Florida Gulf Coast. So it's a 3-game week for them. They will have 4 days off, but let's just see if they're too tired because that kind of makes me think that, okay, maybe Florida Gulf Coast can get this win. But UNC Wilmington is my pick right now.
Yeah, Ben, I'm going Gulf Coast. Ben basically said the exact same thing I was going to say. I thought I was going to oppose both of you with this pick, but Ben had the same line of thinking as I did. Either way, I'm going to stick by it. Florida Gulf Coast over UNC Wilmington at home. To finish the episode, every week we're going to give our upset picks of the week. Matt and I both got them right last week, so coming off of some momentum. For me, I'm going Santa Clara over Oregon. This one, I believe, either Thursday or Friday night. This one's taking place. Santa Clara has already beat Stanford this year. This is a program that I know they're Santa Clara, but they've produced, I think, top 40, I want to say, draft picks in each of the past 2 years. I don't know if anybody on this team stands out as another top 40 pick, but Tennessee State guard Carlos Marshall Jr. has taken a big leap forward. So big factor in this game. Oregon has been favored, I feel like, too much by these analytics. They're like near the top 30, if not in the top 30 in like every site that I've looked at. I don't think they're that good. I'm going to go Santa Clara to beat Oregon.
I'll go next. I'm picking it's 2 power conference teams, but it's certainly an upset in my mind. I'm picking Penn State to beat Texas A&M. This game on Thanksgiving, of course, Texas A&M could very well be a top 10 team in the country when this game is played, or right now they're number 13, so they'll be right outside of it. 2 pretty evenly matched teams on the season so far, both shooting the ball pretty poor at 30%. Texas A&M rebounding well. Penn State rebounding well as well. A&M kind of out rebounding them in that margin by about 8 right now, but Penn State still averaging like 40 rebounds a game. So, no bad thing there. The biggest thing here for me is Qudus Wahab and Ace Baldwin. I feel like Wahab can be a game changer and really take advantage. He's just been off to a hot start this season. I think he can continue that against a Texas A&M team who I'm not sure is going to be able to match up with him down low. You talk about who they got at forward and at big man. I mean, Henry Coleman III, Solomon Washington, a couple of guys, not really impact players. I feel like Wahab could have a big day inside for Penn State. And Ace Baldwin, a guy who's thriving, coming along to Penn State with Mike Rhodes, his former coach at VCU. So maybe I doubted Penn State. I feel like a lot of people doubted the Nittany Lions after what they lost last season, Jalen Pickett and co., but they're off to a 4-0 start, and they've got their first big-time team this week, and they're going to beat them.
All right, and for me, I'm rolling with consistency. I'm rolling with continuity, and I'm going back to the America East. Give me Bryant over Xavier in a Friday night matchup. I really like this Bryant team, as I mentioned before. Xavier, I don't know how the pieces all fit together. They could really use Zach Fremantle and Jerome Hunter right now. Unfortunately, both are out with injury. They're a big favorite in the analytics department, but I do think that they're a little bit overrated. The Musketeers are in that sense. They may very well beat St. Mary's tonight. Xavier could, but I still like the Bryant team to pull off a bit of a stunner in Cincinnati.
All right, and that will do it for today's edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. Thanks, everyone, for watching and listening, whether you've tuned in live or tuned in after the fact. We appreciate the support here. We will be back on Sunday night next week at 9 p.m. Appreciate you guys, and take care.